Hello, I'm Max. I am a lead software engineer here at Skybet, and I'm going to talk to you about the React Context API. So, caveat, I'm not an expert in React at all. I've been playing around with it for a while, and the Context API is new, and I had to play with it, and a lot of people have been talking about it. There's been a lot of stuff online about, is this the new thing that we need? We don't need a whole load of other things, so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit, and what it is, and why you use it, and why maybe you shouldn't use it as well. So first of all, before we talk about the Context API, quick introduction as to what React is. So LinkedIn aren't the only social media company who've given us an awesome piece of technology. Facebook built as React. They realized when building Facebook that user interfaces can be quite complex and HTML code can get very messy. Cosmin spoke about the Jenga, you break one thing, everything breaks. React tries to sort of address that problem a little bit by making things composable. And we like that. Yay, Facebook-like. So what React is, it's just a very simple way of expressing your UI. So the whole point of React is you take your data and you express it in a UI. So in this case, HTML. So TechEdge, hopefully there'll be more than one TechEdge. So we've made it dynamic. We said we can pass in a version, TechEdge 1.1, and that'll render out a nice TechEdge 1.1, and then come back in the not-too-distant future for TechEdge 1.2. And to build this React component, all we do is we basically just describe some HTML. We've said we've got a logo, we've got a version. This just looks like HTML, really. It's a language called templating called JSX, but that doesn't really matter. It looks like HTML. So in essence, React is as simple as this. It's given a state, what does my application look like? And much like Danny, I sat down with my daughter last night to try and explain the concepts to her, and I explained everything about it, and she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, I want to play Lego." So, Lego. So React components. So everything in React is you build a component, everything is a component. And this is actually quite a good analogy for the way that we build software and the way that we should build software. Rather than you don't just like, right, I'm going to go and build a city. You don't do that. You go, right, I'm going to build a house. What's in the house? I'm going to build a wall. So we write our components just like this, and we say, right, okay, so I need a brick. How big is that brick? It takes a width, a length, a depth, and we get our Lego bricks. But what good is a brick on its own? So rather than having a brick, let's build a wall. So we get a whole load of bricks together. Again, the wall is composition of that. So hey, yeah, Lego. But a wall, we're not all Donald Trump. We need more than walls. So we want to build something maybe a little bit more substantial. So we get this massive tree. We get all the components. It's all cascading down. In the top, we say, I want a semi-detached with a garage. I don't know what people search for. And we get a house, a Lego house. But by building this house, we don't just have a house. We've got shutters, we've got doors, we've got a bunch of things that go up to build the house. There's a concept called atomic design, which is a way that people sort of think about how you design user interfaces. And I think that fits really nicely with the way that you can actually build them with React. So you build a house, but you can build things way more complicated than a house. Like dinosaurs. Because everyone likes dinosaurs. But it doesn't really stop there. If we were just building static things all the time that don't change, it would be very boring, and we'd all be just building static websites. I don't think any of our customers want to use a static site. So in reality, we have to interact with things. So that's where state comes into it. So you can see here, so when I've been talking about building out a big tree of components, we're basically passing props down. So that TechEdge thing that I showed that looked like HTML, we're saying TechEdge, the prop that we pass in is version 1.1. Over time, something will change. So if someone clicks on something in a UI, some information is pushed into the browser from a WebSocket, or maybe over time, 1.1 turns to 1.2, or whatever. So what happens is we update our state, our internal state, and then that will trigger a re-render, and anything under the children will re-render. And we get movement. Yay! This is where the analogy gets a little bit tenuous. I just thought it was a cool little link. So, actually, before we get on to why do we need context, so I think the important principles here are state, props, and just sort of the view, really. So our application, at any given point in time when we're looking at it, is a collection of state, where it's just what we're seeing on the screen is how we're expressing that state or that data that we have in that application. So why do we need context? Let's think of an example. Here's a Lego house, a blurry Lego house. If I create this as like a template that I want to recreate all up and down the country because we've got a massive housing crisis, but I don't want them all to be red because it'd be really boring, so I decide I want my house, some houses to be blue. So do I have a property that I pass in at the top and I say, this is blue. Now for that property to get from the top house all the way down to the bricks, that would have to be passed down through every single layer in that house, so it's going through absolutely everything. And that's a real pain to write. It basically ends up you getting really complicated code and really difficult to follow and you're stepping down everywhere. So what we do, that color, potentially you could say, well, this is global state, really. This isn't just the state of that component. This is a piece of important global state that affects everything. So let's set a global state as blue. So I think that's the way to think of it. Context in terms of React is global state. It's something that you want to, that you're going to want to refer to in many places. Good examples would be things like maybe a username or a user preference that's been selected. This is still okay. So I think one thing that's really easy to do when these sorts of things come out, we heard about hype earlier. You think, yes, a new tool, I can use it for everything. It's still fine to compose your components like this. Just because I need to get my color down to a child component, it doesn't mean I need to use context. In this scenario, I just stick it in there like this. Keep it simple, basically. So, how do we use context in React? So there's three concepts that we need to be thinking about. So first of all, we have a context. So I'm using an example here as creating a theme, a changeable theme. So to do this, we need to define a context. We then need to create a provider, and this provider is basically saying, everything underneath me, you are aware of this thing. So you're aware of my context. Then to use that context, to access it, we need to create a consumer. So in the example of the house, possibly, we'd create a provider right around the whole house and say, right, I'm giving this the context of being blue, and then every brick would have a consumer to say, right, I am now blue. For some reason, my GIFs are playing really slowly. Not sure quite why. Show me. There we go. Labour the point. So it does. I'm just building suspense. Show me. So this is kind of lifted and shifted a little bit from the React documentation, so I can't take credit for it. But what we've got here is a context defined. The top part of it is just a JSON object, which says I've got two themes, a light theme and a dark theme, with a couple of properties on it. The important stuff is this stuff at the bottom here, so react.createContext. Anyone familiar with React will hopefully be familiar with that syntax, because it's like create element that we used to use before we got the new class interface. So react.createContext creates us a React context, and I've given it two things. I've given it a property called theme, and I'm telling it it's dark, because that's my default theme. And then I'm saying, I've got an empty function here, which is toggle theme. I'll explain why that's there in a minute. Next up, I've created an app. And in this app, I've said I want to use that context. So at the top here, you can see I'm importing the context. I'm pulling the theme context out of it and the actual themes themselves. And then down here, in the render, so this is, like I explained earlier, every component, you render something. So this is saying, given this state, create me a theme provider. So this is the wrapper around my whole app. And pass in the state. And then underneath that, I have my app. So that means that anything within this app will be able to access this context, so long as I use the other one that I said. Consumer, as long as I use a consumer. I've also got a couple of things up here. So this is me just setting the initial state. Slightly confusingly, I'm setting the default to light here, even though I set it as dark earlier. Shouldn't have done that. And then also I've created a function to say, and this is how I change the context. Sorry, this is how I change the theme. So it's a function that receives an event. Then it says the value of that event, use that to pull out from my themes, which is an object, use the name of the theme to pull out the object of the theme and stick it in the state. So when that runs, you're basically setting a property in state called theme, which will have that list of colors that you've selected. So to be able to use this, we need to create a consumer. And it would be quite messy. And when I first started writing this, I just stuck these all over my app. and it was really messy, and your files ended up getting massive. And I realized the way to do it is to create, rather than having like a text box, create a themed text box. Rather than having a button, have a themed button, and so on and so forth. So what I've done here is I've created a themed text, basically wrapping a paragraph tag and saying when I have a theme defined, well, actually no, it's not even saying that. It's assuming I have a theme defined. It's saying set the color, so the text color for this, to the accent color that's defined in the theme. So the important stuff here, in this, when I create this theme consumer, we've got a function that's calling this, and we can pull out. So this is passing through, this is what's exported from the theme context, and I exported the theme, so the curly braces, a little bit of ES6 syntax saying I can grab out the theme from that, and I'm saying grab my theme, accent, stick it on the color. And this is how I change it. So similarly to where I'm setting the color, to be able to then toggle that function where it's actually changing it, I need to do the same. Do a consumer, pull out the toggle theme, which was the empty function that I exposed from the context. If you remember, at the top level in the app, I told it how to implement that function. And then I'm saying, so this theme select, well, it's basically just a drop down, but I've themed it as well just for consistency. And I've said you've got two options, light or dark. Pick it. What will happen is it'll trigger that function. It'll call the one that was up at the top level of the app. It'll set the context to say the theme is the one that you've just selected, and then your apps will render pretty. So I'm going to try and demo it. Woo! So here we have the app, really straightforward. So we've got the provider. At the top here, you can see that we are setting the theme and setting it in the state. We can see in the theme selector. And then we've got a whole load of themed components here. So theme title, theme text, theme select. And basically what we've got here is, this is going to show us a list of sessions. Each session is, so we've got a sessions component, which is basically a list of sessions. And then that composes a whole load of this session component, which will have some buttons, it'll have some text, and some good stuff. So we run this, and if I get rid of that, hopefully it'll work. Hey! Don't clap, it's fine. It's not doing anything yet. It's actually not doing anything. So we've loaded up a site, and it's listing out all the talks that are here tonight. But I look at this and I go, that hurts my eyes, it's too bright. So I put on the dark theme, and yay, that's much easier to read, and I'm not going blind. So it managed to do that. Woo, yeah, it works. It managed to do that. So I guess what's important there is that this little toggle at the top here is blissfully unaware of everything else on this page. So you've got all the buttons down the bottom, you've got the headings and all the little bits about the little color on the quote. They're all unaware of each other, but they have a thing in common, which is they're aware that context exists, and that, so the toggle at the top knows how to talk to it, these bits down here know how to read it. So decoupling, essentially, so you don't get so much of that Jenga going on. Also, just because, hey, nice and bright. Yeah. So, what does this mean for Redux? So those of you not familiar with Redux, it's a semi-popular tool that's used for managing state in React apps, not only React. It's agnostic of your UI framework, but it's commonly used with React. And there's been a lot of talk about, do we need this anymore? Is it overcomplicated? Am I writing a whole load of boilerplate for nothing? And the short answer is, if you're able to write your application without Redux, then don't use it. You might find that you're able to just use the context API for what you need, or just use internal component state, that's fine. Yeah, use that. Don't prematurely optimize by pulling Redux in. However, if you do need Redux, then you still need Redux. They're solving different problems. Redux is a design pattern. It gives you a way of managing large amounts of complex state and data, and that's definitely a useful thing, especially in large applications. So ultimately, they're solving different problems. State is not the same as context. So your application state is all the data that's in your applications. There's probably quite a lot of it. Your context, you probably want to keep relatively light. It's things that are going to be available anywhere in your application. Think about the potential maintenance nightmares if you put everything into your context and it can be updated anywhere in your application. How are you going to solve that issue? How are you going to actually know where to look? So, another GIF. With great power comes great responsibility. Classic line. Yeah, so this feature does allow you to hop straight in and change things from anywhere in the application, which is quite scary. Scary from the thought of someone who's going to have to come and fix that later. So yeah, just be careful where you use it. And thank you very much.